Hey there, Jake here from CVP. Today we are taking a look at the long-awaited Blackmagic PYXIS. Blackmagic announced this camera all the way back in April, and they have finally started shipping, and we have our first demo units in our studio for us to put through some testing and get some hands-on time with them. So grab a drink, get comfy, and let's explore the Blackmagic PYXIS. The PYXIS is priced at just under £2,800 for the L and EF versions, and just over £2,900 for the PL version. But this could change at any time, so for accurate pricing, head over to cvp.com. This puts it at around £600 more expensive than the Cinema Camera 6K. And for most, I think that extra cash is worth it. Though of course, the pocket-esque form factor for some may be preferred. But personally, I think this camera is better designed for shooting video. For what this camera can do, it's actually priced really well, especially if we compare it to some of the other cameras out there. And the fact it comes with a copy of Blackmagic's excellent DaVinci Resolve Studio, which costs £235 when purchased separately. But let's take a look at how the camera performs. The PYXIS shares the same sensor as the Cinema Camera 6K. It is a full-frame 36x24mm sensor with a resolution of 6048 by 4032 and a pixel pitch of 5.95 microns. The sensor is rated to capture up to 13 stops of dynamic range at both of its native ISOs, the low being 400 and the high being 3200. This is how the dynamic range is mapped across them. As you could with the Cinema Camera 6K, you can capture the full 3:2 aspect ratio of the sensor, which is really nice to have. In our modern video and cinema working world, shooting for more than one deliverable format is really common, and 3:2 can be really helpful for that, thanks to the extra height that you get over 16:9. Pair that with some of the overlays you can use in the camera, and you'll be able to frame while considering both 16:9 and 9:16, which is a pretty common combination. Thanks to its boxy design, it's really easy to get the camera configured nicely for shooting portrait video. However, for some reason currently the UI doesn't rotate when you rotate the camera, which is unlike the Cinema Camera 6K, which does. I've already fed this back to Blackmagic, and I'm really hoping it's something that they can add, as I think with the built-in LCD positioned as it is, it's actually perfect for portrait shooting. This little change would make the PYXIS a social media content shooting workhorse, and the Cinema Camera 6K already does this and runs the same operating system. With it using the same sensor as the Cinema Camera 6K, it should mean that the image they both capture should be pretty much identical. But given the change in cooling and form factor, processing and performance could have changed a little bit. Though this may not make loads of difference between them, there could be subtle changes, which we'll look at in a bit. The PYXIS features a very similar set of recording formats and codecs to the Cinema Camera 6K, though currently it does have two new 16:9 formats that the Cinema Camera 6K doesn't, 6K 16:9 and 4K 16:9, which hopefully the Cinema Camera 6K gets as well. Like the 6K, it's also limited to just recording B-RAW, unlike the pocket cameras, which can shoot ProRes internally too. This is a bit of a shame, and I would have loved to have seen ProRes in this camera as well. Fortunately, B-RAW is a fantastic codec. It is a 12-bit codec that can be shot in either a constant bitrate or constant quality variant. Constant bitrate allows for you to select from 4 different compression ratios, 3:1, 5:1, 8:1 and 12:1. It's best to use constant bitrate encoding when you want more predictable file sizes or want to capture with as little compression as possible, which would be 3:1. You also have constant quality. This is for optimized quality with variable bit rates, for which you now have 4 options. Q0, which has very little quantization and will give you the highest quality out of the variable bit rates, while Q5 uses more quantization for more efficient encoding and reduced file sizes. Having both fixed and variable bitrate options means that you have the ability to record in either great quality or with higher compression to save on storage, all while keeping the flexibility that comes with recording B-RAW. It really is a great format to use in post as well, especially in Resolve. If you want to download some B-RAW to test for yourself, I've put a link to Blackmagic's site in the description below. The PYXIS also allows you to record H.264 1080p 8-bit 420 proxies at the same time as recording RAW. These are recorded into an individual proxy folder separate from your B-RAW clips, with your B-RAW sidecar files in as well. This will save you from having to generate proxies in post, so should make editing with proxies a little bit easier if you do want to. However, playback performance with B-RAW has been very good from our experience. We'll be delving into the workflow side of stuff a little bit later on. When it comes to its slow and fast mode, it performs and behaves the same as the Cinema Camera 6K. As you window in on the sensor, you can shoot higher and higher frame rates. In the camera's maximum 6K 3x2 mode, you can go up to 36 frames per second, up to 48 in 6K 17x9, up to 60 in 4K 17x9, and then up to 120 in a Full HD crop. This slow motion footage looks really good. From the 6K down to the Full HD clips, it all looks very detailed. When recording off speed, you can also go down below your base frame rate. So in a 25p base, we can go down to 5 frames per second. You can also run a 360-degree shutter when running this low, which provides some nice drag shutter effects. You can also dial your shutter speed up to 1/5000th of a second, which is pretty good as well. The camera also has a time-lapse mode built in, where you can capture one frame across a large range of intervals, all the way from every 10 minutes to 2 frames. Pair this with the great shutter options and you can get some really nice results. Like the Cinema Camera 6K, the PYXIS features an OLPF specifically for it. Also known as an anti-aliasing filter, OLPFs are used on a lot of high-end cinema cameras to counter moire. So if we film our focus chart and take a look at it, we can see that there is some aliasing but not too much. During our time shooting with the camera though, we didn't see much in the real world. The image it captures is very nicely detailed without being too overly sharp. Unsurprisingly, the PYXIS 6K uses Blackmagic's most up-to-date Generation 5 colour science, and the colours from this camera look great when handled correctly. You can change between a few different colour spaces and gammas in the menu, as well as ingest and monitor with your own LUTs. In post, we personally find changing the colour space in gamma to ARRI log C4 and wide gamut 4, and then using ARRI 709 LUT or just a straight 709 transform, and the image looks great and is a good place to start. And again, thanks to the PYXIS coming with a full version of DaVinci Resolve Studio, you can really dial in the look you want in Blackmagic's ever-improving Swiss Army post-production tool. Like the Cinema Camera 6K, the PYXIS also has a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200, which is quite rare to see in Blackmagic cameras. This is really helpful though for those uncontrollable low light situations where 400 just isn't enough. Between 100 and 1000, the native ISO is 400, and between 1250 and 25600, the native ISO is 3200. So if you're in a situation where you are shooting at around the 1000 ISO mark, the recommendation is actually to step up to 1250 ISO and adjust the light hitting your sensor to compensate. Here's how the dynamic range is mapped across the ISO range. Compared to what people expect now from cameras like the FX3 and FX6, this camera certainly isn't a no light camera like those, so you will need to light in very dark situations. You also can't control the amount of noise reduction in camera, so you may need to do some in post, which with the included Resolve Studio is relatively easy to do. It will just really shoot up your render times. Right, let's talk about the camera's sensor readout speed. Blackmagic actually provide readout speeds on a forum post for all of their cameras, which is incredibly useful. However, we wanted to run our own tests to see if their numbers are how the camera actually performs. So for this, we used our own in-house measuring tool so we can give you some numbers and compare them to other cameras we've measured before. We didn't have this tool when we originally tested the Cinema Camera 6K, so even though this camera should perform exactly the same, I thought we would include it in this video. In its full 6K 3x2 open gate mode, it has a readout speed of roughly 25 milliseconds, which is pretty high when it comes to modern standards, and artifacts will be noticeable in certain filming situations and shots. As you crop in by lowering the resolution, we can see readout times dropping. As long as you understand the camera's limitations, you should be able to work around this. But for users wanting to use the 6K for action or sports, it's something worth being aware of when executing faster pans or movements. For our Latitude test, we grabbed the PYXIS and the Cinema Camera 6K, just to see how they compare. We haven't included any competition, as we compared the Cinema Camera 6K to most of its competition before. But let us know if you want us to compare the PYXIS to anything else in the comments below. For these tests, we used an L to EF adapter and our trusty Zeiss Otus 55mm. Here's a breakdown of our methodology for these tests, but let's take a look at the results. Starting with overexposure, we exposed the cameras at ISO 400 and have enabled highlight recovery in Resolve for both cameras, which does make quite a large difference at pulling back highlight detail. The PYXIS looks pretty much unchanged up until 4 1/3 stops over, where we can start to see Sam's forehead clipping a little bit. At 4 2/3 we can see our white chip clip and Sam's skin getting lost more too. We can see our blue chip clip here too. From here onwards we can see more clip as we hit 6 stops over. But given that we are 6 stops over here, the highlight recovery does a fantastic job at pulling information back, which we can see if we turn it off here. Looking at the cinema camera 6K, performance looks exactly the same, with really no change whatsoever across the board. Looking at underexposure, we can see more and more noise creeping in as we go throughout the stops. As we are shooting B-roll here, there is minimal noise reduction, so adding some in post will help with the performance. We can also see some CMOS smearing at the lower light shots. Performance does improve when you enable the higher dual native ISO sensor here, so it's definitely worth switching up to it in lower light scenes. Compared to the cinema camera 6K, again, it looks pretty much identical. They both have similar colour shifts, noise patterns, CMOS smearing, and detail overall as each other. So yeah, they both perform almost identically, which is exactly what Blackmagic said to us, even though the added cooling on the PYXIS could have improved the performance slightly. In the past, Blackmagic cameras have suffered from IR pollution, so I wanted to see how the PYXIS 6K performed in this regard as well. With NDs on and off, the camera does a good job at cutting infrared light. This will most likely be thanks to the ORPF having some IR cut built in. As you can see from our examples, the large range of black fabrics doesn't shift red or pink, they are still very neutral, which is great to see. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to buy anything you see in this video or any other filmmaking or photography gear, head over to cvp.com where our experienced team is waiting to help you. The biggest and most obvious change between the PYXIS and the cinema camera 6K is the form factor. While the cinema camera 6K is clearly designed like previous Blackmagic pocket style cameras, the PYXIS is a whole new design and one that I personally prefer. People have been wanting Blackmagic to create a box style camera for years, and it's great to see them finally deliver one. This is actually my favourite camera design from Blackmagic. It feels incredibly robust, as it's made from machined aluminium instead of the polycarbonate plastic the pocket cameras use. It feels like it could certainly take far more abuse while working compared to the pockets. The big disadvantage of the PYXIS is that unlike the pocket, you aren't able to shoot with this camera straight out of the box without adding on some accessories. It is arguably a better form factor than the pocket for most video shooting applications though. You can easily keep it stripped back for lighter handheld configurations, then rig it up for more controlled or cinema workflows. That's the great thing about box style cameras. You can change and adapt it for different preferences and shooting situations. Right, let's take a look around the camera. First off, on the front you have the lens mount and a mini XLR input, which can provide phantom power. The XLR being on the front is a bit odd, but you can easily just get a cable like this one from Condor Blue, which is angled off to the right of the camera, which could make for some tidy runs to an XLR source on the top of your camera. I think it could be orientated slightly better if it went up, but this could run into a lens quite easily as well. Blackmagic have their own mini XLR cables too, but these stick straight out, so aren't quite as elegant. It's a shame that we've lost the mini XLR from the cinema and pocket cameras, but it's good to have regardless. You'll just need to get the right setup to make this as clean and robust as possible. The preamps in the PYXIS are the same that can be found in the cinema camera 6K and pocket cameras. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The quality of the audio is good and should be enough for most people wanting to run audio directly into the camera. But I could also see timecode being used for external sound devices, pretty common with this camera too. It also has a 3.5mm mic input on the rear for smaller mics and a 3.5mm headphone out for monitoring. It also has a pair of built-in mics, which are just under the top ridge of the camera here. These will be very handy as scratch mics. One audio solution that I like the look of is Mid49's AB9 breakout box. This connects to the mini XLR and 3.5mm input and provides two full-size XLRs. It looks really small and I'm sure can be mounted pretty cleanly if you have some form of cage on the camera. Up next you have the locking USB-C connector, which uses DisplayPort to output to Blackmagic's viewfinder and monitor for the PYXIS. The screws for locking them in place are a great addition and will make the camera much more reliable to use, though they are quite fiddly. It would have been great if they'd used something like Corswix's PD Pro USB-C design, but at least you can use regular USB-C cables to replace these, which will make things easy. This also means that you can use a USB-C to HDMI adapter to feed the image out onto a HDMI source if you need to. It's a cool, nice little touch, and hopefully we see more camera brands using USB-C like this. I would love to be able to use the Blackmagic viewfinder across different cameras all using USB. It's really elegant being able to connect a monitor or viewfinder with just a single cable. Up next is the camera's lens mount. The PYXIS is available with 3 different lens mounts, L, EF and PL, and unfortunately these mounts are not user interchangeable. This does make deciding on which mount to grab a little more difficult, but personally I'd grab the L mount, not only so you can use L mount lenses, but also because you can then adapt to EF or PL and any other lens mount that has a flange depth greater than L mount. This makes it so much more versatile, but the native EF and PL mounts are good if you want a rock solid mount with no movement, as they both lock lenses down very well. But I can see accessories coming out for the L mount one with adapters that will reduce displaying the mount down. I really wish there was an internal ND system in this camera. However, considering how simple the autofocus is in this camera, I think adapting from L mount to something like EF or PL and then using a rear filter ND adapter is the way to get around this. There are a few good options on the market for these, from companies like Mica and Morphage, depending on what you want. Just make sure to check if these systems clash with the lenses you want to use with them or not. There are also some great lenses for L mount now, especially Sigma's latest offerings like the 28-105 f2.8 and 28-45 f1.8, which are both excellent. On the bottom of the camera there is an array of different mounting threads. This is a pretty nice layout and should make it great for mounting the camera onto a range of different plates. The only thing I would consider is the little rubber feet which stick out a little bit above the body and the threads. Looking through the vents we can see a nice large fan for pulling cool air into the body, which then exhausts out of the top of the camera. The top is very similar to the bottom, though it does have a slightly revised middle thread layout, which will be better suited for top mounted accessories. It also doesn't have the rubber feet that it has on the bottom, and has cutouts for locating pins on the 3/8 threads, which is a nice touch. If we take a look through the vent, we can see some of the robust cooling system as well. One thing to note is that the PYXIS doesn't have any weather sealing or proofing, so with vents this open, I really suggest being careful in the rain. It's definitely worth grabbing a rain cover for this camera. The left hand side, or operator side of the camera, has a nice 4-inch 1500 nits Full HD LCD panel, which is nice to have here. But I do think having a top mounted monitor is a must for most people using this camera. But when operating the camera in a more controlled environment on a tripod, this would be a great way to operate it. The quality of the screen is good when you're straight on, however I think when stood off to the side the viewing angles aren't the best. For most though, when operating the camera via this screen, you're going to be stood straight onto it. Even though we have the optional USB-C monitor, I still think having the ability to flip this screen out would have been nice, but I understand this would have added extra cost and bulk to the camera. You then have a large array of buttons. You have one for iris, autofocus, a nice scroll wheel which can also be pressed, a function button which can be rebound but is set to grabbing a still as standard, and then the record button. This record button is not only red but also has raised lines on it, which will make identifying which button you are pressing while not being able to see it much easier. You then have an array of 12 buttons which are a mix of camera, monitor, playback and function buttons. You then have a lock button which disables the touchscreen and buttons, which I think is going to come in very handy with this camera. The buttons are nice to operate, but I think this layout will take some time to get used to if you want to try and use them while operating the camera handheld top down. And for most, using a top mounted monitor to control the camera will be much easier and faster. On the right you have a witness mark for the sensor plane and a modular side plate so you can change out the layout depending on how you want to configure the camera. Out of the box you get the standard mounting plate installed on the camera and the SSD plate in the box. The default plate is a smart inclusion as it has mounting points which will be helpful if you want to attach a side handle or mount the camera on a tripod or gimbal for portrait video acquisition. Though I do wish they were orientated like this instead of the way they are, as it would make mounting 2 screws on most tripod plates much easier without the need for a second plate or cage. The SSD plate is basically a plate with a little bit of rubber on it and straps to keep things you may want to mount on the side of the camera like an SSD or a phone secure. To swap the plates out it's pretty simple, it's just 4 screws around the plate, and there is also an optional rosette mounting plate which would be a great option for mounting a side handle. Out of the box the PYXIS is crying out to have a handle mounted on the right hand side of it, and this will be a good way to do so. Companies like SmallRig and CINE have some nice wooden side handles that will work really well here. One solution that I think could also be very popular with the PYXIS is DJI's Focus Pro, which is now finally shipping. The grip is easily mountable on the right hand side of the camera by attaching a NATO rail and using the included NATO attachment for the Focus Pro grip. This won't necessarily be the most ergonomic grip, but considering the basic autofocus performance of the PYXIS, I can see the Focus Pro being a very popular solution for it. You can also connect the camera via Bluetooth to the grip of the Focus Pro or a Ronin, and this will enable the record button on the grips of these to trigger the camera, which is really nice. Another nice thing to note is that the PYXIS can actually be triggered via the rear USB-C port. This means you can trigger it with USB-C RS devices. This will include plugging it into a compatible Ronin and even the Focus Pro handle, which has a USB-C for RS, and then any grip that also uses USB-C for run-stop. Tilta offers a good range of handles that provide this, such as the PD handle that we have of us here. This is the cable from Tilta that you will need to connect your grip to the camera. This is a nice solution, and I think a grip really helps with the overall ergonomics of the camera when shooting handheld. I've put a few options in the description, but you'll need to think about how you want to mount this handle. This could be done with a rosette or a NATO rail, but will probably require some kind of extra side plate. There's quite a lot going on at the rear of the camera. First off, you have a power on-off switch, which is a nice solid switch that you aren't going to hit by accident. The camera actually takes about 5 seconds to turn on, which is pretty good. You then have a decent array of inputs and outputs. This includes a 3.5mm microphone in and headphone output, a USB-C which you can use for external recording or mobile data as well as RS that we mentioned earlier, a full-size 12G STI output, BNC for reference or timecode, a 1G RJ45 Ethernet port, and then a 12V DC locking power input, which is actually different to the one found on the Cinema Camera 6K. The camera not having a HDMI output is an interesting choice, but at least you can convert the USB-C. And having a 12G STI should make up for that and put the PYXIS into a consideration for a lot of productions that need an STI output. The 12G STI really is a great addition. It can handle 4K up to 60 frames per second and is a much more secure connection compared to HDMI. One thing worth noting for anyone coming from a camera without STI is that there is a specific way to plug in everything when using it, especially with 12G as they are commonly more prone to issues compared to 3G. There are a few things that you can do though to help prevent any issues. Make sure to use high quality shielded BNC cables and only use shielded power cables for powering STI accessories. If you can, it is better to avoid P or D-tap cables to power accessories. To avoid damage when using these, it's important that you connect and disconnect them in a very specific way. Pause to read through the different processes. It may also be worth checking out picking up an STI galvanic isolator. Len makes a range of these, but you'll need to make sure you grab one that is designed for 12G STI. These isolators provide isolation of DC currents between two pieces of equipment without degrading the signal. You could also use something like a Freakshow HD 12G STI reclocking DA. This little unit is a compact reclocking distribution amplifier with a single 12G STI in and dual 12G STI out. This could look similar to a splitter, but because it's a DA, it means these units will suffer far less from signal dropouts and longer cable runs. The 1x2 comes with either a DC or 2-pin LEMO power input, so it's easy to power and could be really handy if you need a solution like this for outputting two well-synced outputs. On the rear we also have the media slots. Under this rubber cover we can find two CF Express Type B card slots, whereas the Cinema Camera 6K only has a single CF Express Type B slot. The position of these isn't too bad, but if you want to use some kind of battery adapter, this could be quite fiddly to get to. I also think the rubber flappy nature of this cover isn't great. It would have been far better if it was a more robust door. Anyway, CF Express Type B media is a great choice. Type B is super fast, reliable, and now pretty affordable, so it's great to see this instead of SD or CFast 2. There isn't a recommended media section on Blackmagic's support page for the PYXIS yet, but it will be pretty much the same as the recommended media for the Cinema Camera 6K, so here's that list. Thanks to the USB-C 3.1 Gen 1 port on the back of the camera, you can also record directly to an external SSD. This could be really helpful if you want to edit directly off of an SSD that you've already recorded onto. This also offers a slightly better value for money proposition than CF Express, but personally I'd prefer to record internally if possible, purely because of the risks that come with having a USB-C cable sticking out the back of your camera. But for certain productions this will be a great option, and with the right rigging around it, could be safe for most situations. Blackmagic have a few SSDs that they recommend on their support page, as with some of the higher data rates that this camera can capture, just using any old SSD may cause you to drop some frames. Unlike other camera companies, Blackmagic allows users to choose any compression method regardless of what format you are in, even when some cards or SSDs may struggle with the data rate of these combinations. I would really suggest turning on the stop recording if card drops frame setting, and testing your media to see how far you can push it. When your camera drops frames, an exclamation mark will begin to flash in the middle of the on-screen record button. Blackmagic have a data rates calculator on their website now, which is really helpful as some of these formats will really push the data rate up and fill up your cards quickly. Link to that is down below. The PYXIS comes with a 2-pin 60-watt power supply out of the box. This is actually double the power of the one included with the Cinema Camera 6K. It uses Sony BPU style batteries, which I think is a good choice from Blackmagic, as there are plenty on the market already. You can get a good range of sizes of them, they are decently affordable, and there are plenty available that feature power outputs for different on-camera accessories. BPUs are going to be a really good option for smaller, lighter configurations. For larger battery solutions, I can honestly see a lot of people rigging this camera up with some kind of V-lock solution on the rear. These will most likely use either the BPU connection or the 2-pin input at the back. It looks like Tilta's upcoming plate attaches to the back of the camera using these 4 Torx screws, which looks really robust. We did manage to run some very basic battery life tests, which you can see the results of here, and we've also added some calculated run times with different size batteries. One thing to note is that the camera will give you no warning when it's going to die. It will just cut off, which really isn't ideal. It would be great for Blackmagic to enable some kind of warning when the camera is getting close to running out of juice. We also found the percentage on the battery remaining bar to be quite off as well. We had it die at a range of percentages with some as high as 30%ish. So keeping an eye on your voltage is definitely what I suggest when shooting, and when you get close to 14 volts, I suggest checking your battery on the back and maybe swapping out so you don't have the camera randomly just boot down while you're shooting. The menu system that the PYXIS uses is pretty much identical to the rest of Blackmagic's current line of cameras. So if you've used any of Blackmagic's previous pocket cameras or modern URSAs, you'll feel right at home here. It's incredibly easy and fast to use and has a great range of features and tools for shooting and exposing for video acquisition. This includes the ability to ingest and use your own LUTs, false colour, the ability to use shutter angle or speed, a great punch-in tool, and a decent auto white balance function, though I do wish you could adjust the size of the square of it to be a little bit smaller. You can also easily control what is being fed out on the built-in LCD, SDI and USB-C independently. You also have the ability to create presets for different scenarios. You can then import these into different cameras and change them on the fly, which will make using the camera for different scenarios really simple. The PYXIS is a well-connected camera, which is pretty crucial in today's modern production landscape. First off, the PYXIS can take advantage of Blackmagic's new cloud workflow, which allows you to upload H.264 proxies that we mentioned earlier in the video, or B-raw clips directly to the cloud and into a Resolve project, which will be good for both redundancy and workflows where an editor is remote. You can do this automatically while shooting, or select specific clips to upload after shooting. You can connect the PYXIS to the web via the full-size 1G Ethernet port, or via a phone using their 4 or 5G connection. You can do this by using a USB-C cable connected to your phone, which can easily be mounted onto the side of the camera with the included SSD plate. You can also use the Ethernet port to control the camera over a network, and even copy files via this as well, though this will be slow over a 1G Ethernet port. Most modern cameras require live streaming integration, and the PYXIS is no different. You can use these same connections to stream thanks to the built-in SRT and RTMP support. With the camera featuring a BNC for timecode as well, it will be really easy to set up for a multi-camera shoot, sync your cameras and then sync your rushes in Resolve. The camera also has Bluetooth, which can be used with apps designed for Blackmagic cameras that allow you to control the cameras remotely, which could be very helpful if the camera is mounted in a hard to reach place. The PYXIS is also compatible with Blackmagic's zoom and focus demand system, depending on what lens you pair with it. The USB-C is UVC compliant, which means that it can be used as a webcam as well, which could be helpful for some streamers and content creators. As of the release of this video, Blackmagic have a handful of accessories with the PYXIS. This includes the rosette plate we mentioned earlier, their PYXIS Monitor, the URSA CINE viewfinder, and top handle. At IBC 2024, just before Blackmagic started shipping the PYXIS, they announced the PYXIS Monitor, which is specifically designed for the PYXIS system, but will also work on the URSA CINE cameras. However, once you've got it mounted on the PYXIS, you can really tell that it's been primarily designed for this system. It just looks right, and in my mind, most PYXIS owners should grab this, especially at its very reasonable price point. The one we have with us here today is a really early prototype, but it still looks and performs well. It features a 5-inch 1080p touchscreen that has a peak brightness of 1500 nits. It uses a single USB-C cable for both data and power, and plugs into the viewfinder port on the front of the camera. It has 3 custom function buttons and can fully control the camera as you would on the regular screen on the camera. It can be purchased individually, with a top mounting system, or with a more EVF style positioning kit. Monitor only, it's just £323, which is actually really well priced for something that has these specs and feature set. The EVF mounting kit comes with everything that the monitor mounting kit does, so if you're wanting to have the flexibility that comes with that kit, or mount it directly onto the camera, this is 100% worth getting over the regular kit. If you are going to get the EVF mounting kit for the monitor, it might also be worth grabbing the top handle, as that works really well with the included EVF rigging. Ever since I first saw the PYXIS, I said that it was missing a way to control the camera in a more solo operator way, as the side LCD doesn't flip out, and this is the solution. Honestly, this monitor completely transforms this camera's usability, and when paired with the grip on the side, it makes the PYXIS a great camera to use handheld. How you want to mount it will depend on how you want to rig up your camera, but the Blackmagic options are pretty good for their prices. Personally, I think the monitor is a no-brainer for anyone grabbing a PYXIS as their primary camera. If an EVF is more your thing, you'll be happy to see Blackmagic's new URSA CINE viewfinder, which, like the PYXIS monitor, will work with the PYXIS and the URSA CINE cameras, and uses a single USB-C for data and power. Blackmagic have created their own viewfinder before, but this one is certainly an improvement. Its overall physical design is much nicer, and the updated mounting bracket and rod system looks much better than their previous URSA viewfinder. This means that it's easy to adjust into a position of your preference, and if you want to rig it up onto a third-party system, it will be decently easy to re-rig this onto it, as the bracket for it is pretty flexible. It uses a 1920x1080 OLED panel, comes with 2 different eye cups, has a good diopter range, though this does rotate the eye cup when you adjust the diopter, which is kind of annoying, and it has a range of buttons for camera control, including a record one, punch in, and exposure, which brings up false color, and you then have 3 customizable buttons. You can customize all of these apart from the zoom button. The quality of the EVF is good. It's not massive, but is good for the price, and hopefully will be something that can grow with you as new Blackmagic cameras come out that use USB-C like this. It looks really good, especially considering its price, which includes the mounting bracket as well, though it doesn't include the top handle, which I would suggest grabbing if you want to use the included NATO-style quick-release system. I'm sure this is going to be a popular solution for many people grabbing these cameras and the URSA CINEs. I honestly wish more brands would offer an optional EVF like this for their systems. As both the monitor and EVF use the DisplayPort protocol, you can actually use them with USB-C DisplayPort sources, like our Macs, and use them as monitors, which you never know, could come in handy. Unfortunately with the PYXIS, you can't use the PYXIS monitor and EVF at the same time, as the USB-C at the front can't be split out, and this is the only port on the camera that can handle these. If you do want to use an EVF and a monitor at the same time though, you'll need to choose which Blackmagic accessory you want to use, and then just use an SDI monitor or viewfinder. It's still good though to have this option. Both the monitor and EVF use a regular USB-C cable, which means that you'll be able to relocate them at longer distances than their included cables. This could be useful for a few different configurations. With the monitor, you could have the monitor mounted away from the camera while it's mounted out of reach, or mounted onto the side of a gimbal so it's not added awkward weight on top of the camera body. With the EVF, this will make it good for mounting it for shoulder rig configurations with a bit more flexibility, or for some more unique configurations. Undoubtedly, there will be loads of accessories coming out for the PYXIS, and thanks to its modular design, I think there are certainly going to be some popular ones for different configurations. There's going to be a bunch of rigging available from a range of brands, and we've got a bunch on order, and are interested to see which ones work the best. But no matter if you want to rig it up for handheld, shoulder, cine, or studio, there will be a good configuration for you. The PYXIS will also be easily mountable on a bunch of support equipment. I know a lot of people are going to ask how well it mounts onto a gimbal, and we managed to get it rigged onto our RS4 Pro decently easily. There is quite a bit to think about when buying a PYXIS, so we are planning on doing a how to upgrade video on it, so let us know if anything has caught your eye for it down in the comments below. And if you want some advice now on what kit may be best for you, head over to cvp.com and speak to one of our experienced team. There are certainly a few cameras that the PYXIS is going to be compared to. The first and most obvious one probably being the Cinema Camera 6K, as it shares so much with that. These two cameras are separated by about £600, and I think there are clear differences between them. The Cinema and Pocket cameras can pretty much be grabbed out of the box and shot with immediately, whereas the PYXIS requires accessories to get it to a similar point. It really needs a top-mounted monitor and a grip on the side to get it into a more shooting configuration. This does mean that you need to add on around £486 for the PYXIS monitor, and then around £150 for the rosette plate and a side handle. So it does end up getting quite a bit more expensive compared to the Cinema Camera 6K. But of course with this you do arguably get a better designed camera for shooting video. Looking at other cameras like it, you have the Zcam F6, which Zcam have just updated with their Mark II series, Canon have the R5C, C70 and C80, and Red have their Komodo and Komodo X. Some of these are at different price points, but they will be contemplated between of course. Let us know which cameras you would want us to compare the PYXIS to down in the comments below. The PYXIS is the box camera that a lot of people have been wanting Blackmagic to release for years. The images it can capture are pretty much identical to the Cinema Camera 6K. They are detailed, have rich colour, and being able to use the full 6K 3x2 of the sensor makes it incredibly versatile. In the next PYXIS, I would personally love to see a touch more dynamic range and a slightly faster readout sensor. Maybe a Blackmagic RGBW sensor like the ones that they use in their URSA CINE cameras. The form factor is by far my favourite part of this camera. It's easily the best camera physically that Blackmagic have ever made. It's very well built, feels really solid, and is incredibly versatile, especially when combined with the internal formats, outputs, connectivity and workflow options. The big feature missing from Blackmagic cameras now though is a more robust autofocus system. I think with how many people have started to use video autofocus systems like the ones found in Sony, Canon and Panasonic cameras, I think it would be awesome for Blackmagic to develop their own system as well. But this is simply one of the compromises you have to make with these cameras. Blackmagic clearly wants to target people manual focusing themselves or more cine orientated workflows. And there are plenty of shooters out there who are fine with not having autofocus. However, I think adding a system for their cameras would open them up to an even larger group of creators and make their cameras even more complete. But again, when you come back to the price and what this camera can offer, there is going to be some kind of compromise somewhere. And for most video shooters, no autofocus is that big one. If you really want autofocus with this camera, I think grabbing a Focus Pro is probably going to be your best bet. If we've missed anything, or if you've got any more questions, let us know in the comments below. Or check out Blackmagic's excellent 233-page manual, link to which is in the description. If you're interested in ordering one of these for yourself, I've put some links to our website in the description below. And if you liked the video, please give it a like and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.